If they offer you a piece of cake, let's say, you have to say no at least 3 or 4 times until you finally cave. Sometimes I found out at the very end that the two people at a party or whatever were a couple, and I thought, okay, but how? The plan wasn't to come over for this meal. You're lucky if they offer you a glass of water.
Hello and welcome to another Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today's guest comes from Morocco, a country I've not yet featured on this podcast and one that so many of you wanted to see featured. What's more, she's a conference interpreter, speaks 5 languages fluently, has lived in 3 different countries, and has been residing in Germany for 7 years. So I'm very excited to welcome Maha to the show to talk about the differences in the Moroccan and German culture, language, and much, much more. So welcome, Maha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'm very excited. I actually made a post recently on the channel. I'm not sure what it was for Instagram. And people started asking, when are we going to see Morocco? And I said, actually have a podcast coming up with a Moroccan girl. And I got so many likes on that little post that no one was supposed to see. So I know there's going to be so many Moroccans watching this, excited to see their country featured finally.
I'm so happy about that because that was actually also me a few years ago. So I started following your channel when I moved to Germany. So it's like a full circle moment right now. And I've also been waiting for the dating, what it is like to be dating a Moroccan. So I'm excited to be part of the podcast now.
Yeah, and I'm also excited because as much as I know Morocco, I have traveled there quite briefly. There's so much to the culture that I don't know. And actually, this is going to be like a learning process for me as well. So you've lived for 7 years in Heidelberg.
Yes. So I first moved to Mannheim, actually. That's where I learned the language, or I did my C1 certificate. And then I moved to Heidelberg, which is right next to it.
So what has it been like, not only living in Germany, but living in a fairly small German town? Are people approachable? Is it easy to talk to people?
So I don't think, I mean, for Germans, they don't consider Heidelberg a small town. For me, it is tiny because I'm from the capital city in Morocco. So for me, of course, it doesn't get any smaller. But so I've heard from a lot of people that this is actually a city and not just a town. Usually, I think the smaller the place, the more approachable people are. But it's not the case for Heidelberg. And funnily enough, even when I moved only from Mannheim to Heidelberg, and they're 15 minutes away from each other, people told me you'll see that people are less friendly in Heidelberg and that they're a bit more arrogant. And I couldn't believe that. I thought, okay, it's the same state. It's, at a very close distance. How could that be? But it is true. So since Heidelberg has this kind of, it's famous for the university, also for the town in the US. It's a very known city because the military base was here during the Second World War. People tend to have that people feel a bit more or a bit better than others just because they live here. Yeah, so I think that's a very German thing, how cold people can seem, or at least I think it's everybody who has been here or lived here would say that German people are quite cold. I wouldn't go as far as calling them cold. I think they're a bit more reserved at the beginning, which for me was clearly a big cultural shock at the beginning. So they don't make it as easy to approach them at first. They don't make a lot of small talk. They might even give you the feeling that you're not welcome to talk to them or become friends with them. So I think that's unfortunately a true German cliche.
It's very interesting. I maybe was in Heidelberg like years ago, but I had just passed. I was passing by. All I remember from the city, because I was on that tour, was that they have this monkey that you're supposed to touch. And what was the thing with the monkey? Does it bring you good luck? I don't remember.
Yes, so it's kind of a weird monkey. The monkey, but the face doesn't really look like a monkey, and there are mice next to it, and you need to rub on the mice to get good luck and get good grades for the year.
Okay, now I remember. Perfect. Thanks for reminding me. But that's very interesting. So, what have been the biggest culture shocks for you as, a Moroccan coming from this warm, very hospitable culture and moving to Germany? What has surprised you the most?
Well, definitely, I think how we approach people and how to make friends. So I think that was something I struggled a lot with at the beginning. I was getting the feeling that I was getting nowhere with the Germans, even though I was trying to be friendly and show that I appreciated them, and I did that by inviting them over. So not only suggestion plans, but also just inviting them over to my house and cooking or offering food and tea. And in Morocco, that's a very normal thing to do. That's how you show friendliness. That's how you show that you appreciate the person. But it took so long for my German friends to reciprocate that. And I have to admit, at first, I really thought it's because they didn't like me, and that's why I didn't want me in their houses. But then I came to find out that that was not it. Obviously, they're a bit more reserved at the beginning. But then what I started appreciating about German friendships is that once you're in, you're in. You know, it's 100% honest. You don't have to ever doubt yourself again. If they're just inviting you out of politeness, it's not that. They really want you and accept you as you are. And it's also a relationship that is most likely going to be for life. So the friends that I've made the first year here are still my friends up until this point.
Is it different in Morocco? You're saying that in Morocco it's quite common to invite people to your house, and so maybe people reciprocate and do the same, and so it's easier to get into contact with people, to get closer to people. But is it then harder to keep friends for life?
I wouldn't say it's harder to keep friends for life. I wouldn't say so. So I think it's a process that maybe at the beginning it doesn't take as long, but then maybe takes more effort to keep it that way. So because people obviously, when you invite them, they kind of also expect you to invite them back. That's just a way to be polite. It's not that they're really counting. Okay, you've invited me twice, I have to invite you twice as well. It's not like that, but there is that kind of expectation that it's going to be reciprocated the whole time, and sometimes that can be a bit draining, especially with people who don't do the same. So if it's only one-sided, then it might be that the friendship or any relationship kind of falls apart. In Germany, I don't really see it that way. So I think people have no expectations. So that also leads to no disappointments. And even if you don't invite them over all the time, if you're not always asking after them how they're doing, they're not going to be offended by that.
I think it's very interesting when we talk about hospitality, because that's something I want to talk about since we started with that topic. I do believe, of course, we know that Moroccans and, North Africans and Middle Eastern people, and like that whole area is very hospitable. But I wonder, are there codes in place as well for this kind of hospitality? So you'd mentioned it's just the polite thing to do. So if you invite someone, they invite you back. Are there other things that people have to know if they're going to Morocco? For not maybe for not maybe disrespecting, because I feel like respect is a big part of the culture as well.
Yes, so I don't think people going to Morocco need to know these codes. I think they're really, so the Moroccans invented them for them, really, because to them, foreigners are kind of a gift even when they come to their country, and so they have to show them that hospitality and have to invite them over and cook for them, and they don't expect anything back. For them, the joy comes from that person being there and just being happy and appreciating all of that, even if what they're offering is maybe not much. Maybe the little food that they have, they're gonna share it with you. So I think for us, that makes us genuinely happy, and we just want the other person to also be happy and comfortable. Now, when it comes to the codes for Moroccans, so there are small things, I would say. So first of all, when you go to a Moroccan household, you will always be offered something. So at least tea. That's not a cliche. That's very true. Every Moroccan household has tea, even if they have nothing else. They will at least have tea to offer. And even if you're just stopping by to pick up something, they will beg you to stay, and you will be offered some food and drinks. I think that's really how we show that hospitality is through food. Um, and of course the other person, so there is this kind of dialogue that is almost always the same. So the other person will have to refuse and will have to say, no, please, I really don't want to be a burden. Then the other person will answer back, no, of course, this is, it's my pleasure, of course, to do all of this. So there's that kind of fighting in a way, of both of them trying not to be a burden, and until one of them caves, really. If they offer you a piece of cake, let's say, you have to say no at least 3 or 4 times until you finally cave. And that's the way they do it. As well as when a person gets you a present or they make a compliment, same thing. You have to refuse or even say, oh, I didn't want to be any trouble, and then the other person will insist. So they're just things that are in the way we communicate, but they're really a big part of it, I would say.
And in Germany, I'm assuming that's not the case.
No, that's definitely not the case. So I wouldn't, as I said at the beginning, I wouldn't say that German people are cold, but I wouldn't also go as far as saying that they're hospitable, or at least not in the way we Moroccans consider to be hospitality to be. So you might go to a German person's house and maybe you won't be offered anything if that wasn't the plan. If the plan wasn't to come over for this meal, you're lucky if they offer you a glass of water. And they don't not do it out of greed, I wouldn't say. I think it's just because they expect you to ask. So if you want something to eat or to drink, you're just going to directly ask them straightforward. In Morocco, that would never happen because you would be too scared to be a burden on the person if you ask for something else, which, to be honest, you never really have to ask because there will be things on the table anyway. That's also another thing. So even if people are invited for just tea, and I'm saying just tea in quotation mark because it's never just tea, the table will be overflowing with lots of other things. In Germany, I've never seen that happen. So I've been to houses, so maybe for the typical cafe and kuchen, so coffee and cake in the afternoon, and there would be 2 pieces of cake. So yeah, so if it's 2 people, then it's 2 pieces of cake. So and same thing when they cook a meal, they will cook for the exact amount of number of people coming. In Morocco, you have 3 people coming over, they will cook for 10 or 15 people even.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think what's very interesting as well, as you mentioned, is dance. I know in Iran they have this, and they have a name. It's called taruf, where it's a
Okay.
please, it will be my honor, and they say no, and they refuse, and then so it's this dance that you need to do before you actually agreed to something. But I would assume that Germany, being a very direct country, like if someone says no, they actually genuinely mean a no, and if they say yes, then they genuinely mean a yes. So have you noticed this difference as well? People obviously don't do this dance in Germany.
For sure. So that was actually one of the funniest anecdotes that have happened to me is that I've been at somebody's house and I said no when they offered me a piece of cake or whatever it was. And of course, I really wanted that piece of cake that was even destined for me because that was the only one there was. Um, and I would say no, and they would never ask again. And then I would go home hungry and sad just because then I didn't really, let's say, dare to ask for it again because I didn't want to be impolite or a burden. But then I learned, obviously, that that's not the way to do it. And I now, if I'm at somebody's house and they offer me coffee, then I don't mind asking, "Do you actually have tea? I don't really like coffee," you know, which I would have never have done before, and which people usually don't do in Morocco.
Yes, it's the difference I always say between high context and low context cultures, where like Morocco is obviously very high context, and Germany is very low context. For anyone that doesn't know, obviously low context cultures spell things out, and high context you're supposed to get the cues, and so a lot of it is unsaid. And I find this going to workplace and the way people interact as well in the workplace. From what I know, and tell me if I'm correct, in Moroccan culture, I would assume that when people call each other for work, they would start off with discussing and asking each other questions about the family, the health, and in Germany, it's quite different.
That's true as well. So, not even at work, in any kind of situation, you never just start a conversation going straight to the point. You will ask about the person, how they're doing, even go as far as asking about their family. Even if you don't know them, you will do that just out of courtesy, and the other person will also kind of reply superficially. They're not going to go into detail. They're just going to say that everybody's doing well. I've noticed that I do that just in the way I talk, that I never say hello. I always say, hello, how are you? And Germans actually reply to that question. So if they're not doing well, they're going to say it. And it came as a surprise to me many times because in Morocco, it's kind of a rhetorical question or one that you expect to only be answered positively. Um, and yeah, in Germany, they're first surprised that you're actually asking how they're doing, and then they're going to expect, you know, that that the person's asking them that because they want to know, and so they will give you a real answer. And yeah, in Germany, in a work context or even university context, people go straight to the point. So you arrive in class, and the professor is not going to ask you about anything else. We start the minute that the clock, it's the time that it's time for class.
Yeah, that's very efficient. The efficiency stereotype of Germans. Yeah, that's very interesting as well. I mean, obviously, in North America, there is a culture of asking each other, "Hi, how are you?" And oftentimes, as you've mentioned, no one actually expects a real answer. And in the more direct cultures like German culture, that question actually doesn't get asked a lot, and when it does, you give a real answer to that. So, um, is it rude in Morocco to start a conversation with just saying, "Hey, I need to get this project done. Good morning. I need to have this done." Would that be considered rude? Which do you need to start off with, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And all that jazz.
I think it really depends on the context. So I think if you're in a work environment and you're talking to your boss, you're not going to consider that rude. You're just going to consider, okay, this person is in a higher hierarchy than me, and they want me to get this done, and so it needs to get done. But in other contexts, maybe if somebody is calling you, even though they're in a rush and they want an information urgently, and they don't say hi, how are you first, then that would be considered rude. No matter how much in a rush you are, you still have to at least have that introductory phrase, let's say, of hi, how are you, and maybe even ask about a couple of family members.
Okay, interesting. Were there any other surprises?
Another thing, and this will again come back to the hospitality thing, is, well, we've talked about how direct Germans are, and that also comes up when you're at somebody's house, let's say, and they have later plans, or they have to work, or they're just tired. They will tell you that. So you're there drinking coffee, and then they'll suddenly say, "Hi, I'm sorry, but now I need to go because I need to rest." And in Morocco, that would never happen. So that would be really considered kind of rude. People, first of all, beat around the bush a lot to tell you how they're feeling or what they want. And second of all, they will change their plans to adapt to you. So if let's say you had plans to go out with some friends, and then other people called you and said, okay, we're nearby, we wanted to stop by and say hello, you will cancel your plans and you're suddenly stuck at home, and just to be able to receive those people. And if let's say again they were just invited for tea and it's getting late, you want to have dinner and then go to sleep because you have work the next day, you're not going to say that. So instead you will say, okay, you have to stay for dinner, and you'll have dinner all together. And I don't think this would ever happen in Germany, that people would go out of their way, let's say, or even change their plans just to adapt to you. And I don't know if I like the German version or the Moroccan. I think now I'm between both. Um, because of course I do appreciate having my friends over and that they feel comfortable about staying in my place. If I'm tired or I have something that came up, I can just be honest about that and nobody's going to get offended. So now when I'm back home and these kind of situations kind of come up, sometimes I do hear from my mom that I'm being rude just because I want to be honest with the person and say, now is not a good time because I have this other plan.
Yeah, I love listening to you because it makes me really think about where I come from. So I'm originally Russian, born in Russia. And even though obviously Morocco and, Eastern Europe are worlds away, we have, I don't want to say somewhat of a similar hospitality culture, but it's very important to be hospitable. And if someone comes over, you are going to get everything done ahead of time. You're going to go to the store ahead of time. You're going to cook a meal ahead of time. You always should have more food than needed. And you also wouldn't be direct if you want someone out of the house because that's considered rude. And I remember I was in the Netherlands. I love to give examples of the Netherlands because I haven't really experienced as much going out in Germany. But I remember going to my ex-boyfriend's friend's house, and we arrived there for dinner. Of course, I was very hungry. And his friends haven't bothered going to the store ahead of time. So we get to the house and they're saying, okay, well, we're going to go now to Albert Heinz and get the food. And then we're going to cook. And you would never see this in Eastern Europe. Like that's just not something because, if you have guests over for dinner, like dinner should be already prepared, or at least at the final stages of being prepared. And, obviously shouldn't just have one plate. You should have different types of food on the table. That's the way I like to do it as well. But that's not a thing there as well. It's like, if you are invited for this specific dish, this is what you're going to be eating and nothing else. And so knowing this, I was already prepared going to people's houses. I was like, should we bring some food? If we're invited for beer, should we bring some food with us? Because if we don't bring some food, potentially we're just going to drink a beer. And I'm very, very hungry. I need to buy the food to guarantee that I'm going to, at least feed myself, and feed other people as well. But that was very interesting for me because my ex-boyfriend didn't have any issues with that because that was the culture he was raised in. So he had expected that. Have you experienced something similar in Germany?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that actually, because it's the exact same. So I even remember when I was younger and still living at home, I would be annoyed when these unplanned guests came over, and my mom would send me to the nearest, or me or my brother send me to the nearest bakery or supermarket to get more things. It's not that we didn't have anything at home. As I said, any Moroccan household has at least some tea, and I would be so annoyed because I thought, okay, but what's the point? It wasn't planned, so it's not like they expect anything. But of course, that would be a no-go to just not put anything on the table. And now I'm actually realizing that I'm that person. When my friends tell me, hey, can we come over? Then I'm going to run to the nearest supermarket and just grab some snacks because I cannot, for the life of me, offer just a juice or tea. There has to be at least some other snacks or some things to eat. And funny that you also mentioned about asking people if you can bring something, because I realized that in Germany, that's how you can be polite. So you're going over to somebody's house and you ask them, hey, can I or should I bring something? And they will also let you know honestly if you do or if you don't. And if they say no, then they also really mean no because they've already prepared everything else, and you don't need to bring anything extra. And in Morocco, you would never ask the person you're going to if you should bring something, just because you will never go empty-handed. You will always bring something with you without the other person asking you, just because that's how you express that politeness. Again, people expect you to bring something, and you also think that it's your duty to do so.
So, what is something that has been, I would say, either the best part about living in Germany and the hardest part about living in Germany for you?
The hardest would be the weather, the lack of sun, the food as well. I do struggle with the typical German food here. And yeah, but I think especially the weather. I always joke with my friends that my Mediterranean skin was not built for this. But of course, the hardest part would be being away from my family. So I think if I could have the best of both worlds, would be to be living here, leading my life, but also being able to go home maybe every weekend, just like my friends do that are from other cities and that are studying with me. Um, I think every time I'm in Morocco and I have to leave, I get that same feeling that I got the first time that I moved here, which was kind of like having a rock on my stomach, or kind of like a weighing sadness. And every time I have to come back, even though I've been here 7 years now, or over 7 years, I get that same feeling. Although now it goes away after 24 hours of me being back. And the first time, it obviously took many months for that feeling to go away. I think once I had my friends and my circle, my routine, it made all of that easier, obviously. And the best thing, so it's going to sound very cheesy, but I would definitely say the friendships that I've made along the way. I, mm, I value a lot of things that I have here, so such as my independence and my freedom. Being able to come and go as I please with nobody asking where I'm going, and also feeling safe doing so. That's also something that I don't take for granted that I have here. So again, I already mentioned that the German friendships are really for everyone's. And even the other internationals that I've met here and that I've now, last year, for instance, when I was in the US, we met, across the ocean in North America and South America. I've even been to 2 international weddings of direct friends of mine. And that's something that I value a lot because we really saw each other grow. And you can see that from when we first met up until this point, how that kind of evolved.
Yeah, that's a great answer. What has the dating been like? I mean, if you could compare Morocco versus Germany, I'm sure there are so many differences.
Yes, it's very, very different. So, the cultural aspect, I would say, plays a big role in the dating life as well. Um, so already, I think the way we communicate things, I think here again that German straightforwardness might even save you some time because at the beginning, the person will normally be straightforward about what they want, and will let you know, or also have no problem in letting you know if something is bothering them. In Morocco, I don't see that happening really. Men might also even lead you on, even if they're not really interested, just because that's how you do it. So that first in communication, and then also behavior is very different. So I found German men to be not at all flirty, or if so, just a little bit. They're not really, even if they're interested, they're not really going to show you that at the beginning, or maybe they're thinking that they're showing it to you, but really, me, being from the culture that I'm from, I don't really see that. And I think Moroccan men do make you feel desired, so they're going to play that game of really chasing you. And maybe the woman is also going to play a bit hard to get. So again, the play, I guess we really like these kind of things in Morocco. Um, and that kind of adds to the excitement, I would say. Whereas in Germany, sometimes it feels like, we're negotiating a business or something. It's really straight to the point, and I mean, that never happened to me personally, but I did have a friend who had only a guy come up to her directly and say, "Hey, I'm interested. Would you be interested in dating. And in Morocco, that would not happen. So men do tend to make the first step, but it's a bit more subtle, or a bit more playful, I would say.
How conservative is Morocco? So I can imagine bigger cities versus villages versus parts of the country can be very different. But does it get very, very conservative where our arranged marriage is still a thing in some of the parts?
Well, arranged marriages, I don't know. I've never really heard of that happening that much in Morocco, at least not the same extent as maybe some other cultures or in countries. Or if they do, it's not arranged marriage as we think of as enforced marriage, but maybe just that some family members intervened just to allow two people to get to know each other and so on. So for me, when I hear arranged marriage, I really think of forced, and I don't think that happens as much, or that the man is going to come to the family of the woman or the girl to ask for her hand without her really knowing. I don't think that happens anymore. Maybe in really conservative circles, and as you said, not in a bigger city, but rather maybe in a small village by the mountain. Um, but Morocco is very, or way more open than, at least compared to other Muslim countries, since we're so close to Europe geographically. Um, we do get influenced by that a lot. So I think people are way more open-minded or have been more influenced by that Western culture. And I did notice that in the last years, now that I've gone back to Morocco to visit, it has become a lot less taboo. So I do see a lot of people holding hands in the streets, hugging, and having all kinds of PDA, which I think a few years ago or a couple of decades ago, it could even be possible that the police arrest you if you're not married to the person you're with and you're showing PDA with in the street, and that is not the case anymore. So it has become a lot more open. I'm guessing also thanks to social media and all of this era of information technologies. It has changed and evolved a lot. So I don't think people see it as taboo anymore. The other thing, I think it also depends a lot from one family to another, is about introducing your boyfriend or your girlfriend to your family. I think people are a bit more reserved when it comes to that, maybe especially women, at least from my experience. You will introduce your boyfriend to your family if you are sure this is the person you're going to end up with, or at least if you're sure, okay, this is actually very serious. You would never introduce them to someone after the third or fourth date. I think for that, families are still pretty conservative or a bit more reserved.
For you, does family approval is that very important for you to start seeing someone seriously?
Yes, of course. So I think I do trust my judgment, and I do think that if I choose someone and it's getting serious, then I know they're a good person. So I do trust my own judgment first, and because in the end, it's also me who's going to be with the person and not my parents. But it is important to me that they do get along, because for me, family is, of course, extremely important. I'm very close to my parents. I'm close to my brother. So, of course, what they think has an influence on me. Um, I have been also always quite opinionated, and if I decide something or choose something, then I'm going to stick with that. I'm not easily influenced. Um, so I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit of, okay, you need to accept this because this is my life. But of course, I would want them to be okay with it. And to be totally honest, if they really, this has never happened, but if they really disapprove of someone, then it might get me into thinking, okay, maybe I have been kind of blinded, or is there something that I'm not seeing? So I would go as far as trying to understand why do they think that, and not just completely shut them off and say, okay, it doesn't really matter.
Yes, no, no, that absolutely makes sense. When it comes to first dates, I don't know how much experience you've had and how much experience you obviously want to share, but you have had some experience going on dates with German guys, I can imagine. Yes.
Yes,
I like your
and
reaction to this.
yeah, I'm saying it with this face, and I think all my friends would understand without me even explaining it. But so one thing that was also quite a cultural shock for me is how much the also dates or any kind of plan is in the outdoors. So German people and German men, I think especially, are very outdoorsy. First dates where for me, I'm gonna get ready, I'm gonna make myself a bit more pretty, wear something nice, and then no, we're going on a hike or on a 1 hour walk uphill or something, and then by the end of the date, I'm sweating and looking horrible. So that's something that I had to kind of get used to. That people don't necessarily want to meet up and just sit in a at a cafe and just talk about anything. That's another thing. They don't make a lot of small talk, so I guess they want to be outdoors to kind of have that be the topic of conversation. So for us Moroccans, it's not usually like that. Especially at the beginning, you usually go to a restaurant, a cafe. Again, it always revolves around food for us, whereas for Germans, it's the outdoors, which is funny because we have better weather, we have constant sun, and we're not gonna go be in the outdoors for a date or even an outing with friends.
Yeah, that's such a cliche when it comes to Germans and the first dates. I mean, every time I turn on Instagram or TikTok, there's always all these jokes about Germans wanting to go on a walk instead of, like as a date, let's go on this hike. Oh, it's only, 6 kilometers or something crazy like that. And it's actually funny. I remember I had a date with a German guy and he asked me, do you want to go on a hike? And I remember this was years ago, and my mom said, oh no, but like, so how are you going to wear heels on the date then? Because Eastern European mentality here. And I was like, Mom, I'm not wearing heels on a hiking date. She said, well, why don't you tell him, I was going to wear heels, but because we're going on a hiking date, I couldn't wear the heels. And I said, Mom, imagine I tell a German man I was going to wear heels. But because we're going on a hiking date, I mean, he would just cough and turn around and then walk away. But I remember I'd experienced that hiking date, and it is very interesting. I suppose there's something to it as well, that if you're moving around and you're experiencing things, maybe it's easier to make conversation than if you're sitting in a restaurant. But I can imagine coming from Morocco, that must be very strange. And also coming from most of the world, to be very honest, I haven't heard of hiking dates apart from countries like Germany, maybe Scandinavian countries. Not many countries do hiking as a first date. It's a bit odd.
Yeah, it's very odd for me to do any kind of sporting activity, actually. So it's not something that I hate. I love being in the outdoors and I love moving when the weather is good, though. So when it's snowing outside, I do not want to go on a walk or even less so a hike. But they do make a lot of plans like that. So I don't know, even let's go climbing. So indoors, that's also a thing that I've seen in Germany a lot, that people just go and do that for a date, or any kind of other sporting activity. For me, at first, it kind of came off as cheap, even so, because they didn't want to pay for a meal, which I have to say, it's also a thing that I've noticed that is different from Morocco, especially at the beginning. So you're gonna be picked up and then dropped off at your house when the date is over. The guy is going to pay for the meal, the coffee, whatever. um, that is very normal, and again, also just politeness and kind of maybe also an old school kind of tradition of the man is in control, or the man has to protect or take care of the girl. But even though it's so old school, I'm not gonna lie, I do like it. In Germany, that doesn't always happen. So this never, I have to admit, this never happened to me personally, that a guy didn't pay on the first date, but it did happen to a lot of friends of mine. Um, that it's very normal to ask for separate bills even, or that he tells you, okay, I paid this time and so next time you have to pay. That's, yeah, for me also something that I was not used to at all.
Yeah, that's a bit of a turn off. I can imagine that you're Moroccan, and so they go into the date knowing, understanding the cultures can be different, and they're going to be expected to at least pay the first date. But I think it's quite different. I can imagine in Morocco, it's not just paying on the first date; it's paying throughout the dating process as well, because the man is expected to be a gentleman and to win over the woman and to seduce the woman and to court the woman, and so the man is expected. And I think he would also feel emasculated should he let the woman pay the bill, because a bit of that ego and that the macho culture comes into play there as well. So I can imagine it's not just the first date, whereas like a German, I think best case scenario, he pays for the first 2 dates, and then you have to reciprocate, right? Like, I don't think he would, there's no expectation that he's going to pay throughout the dating process, unless he's a very international German guy, or he comes from a mixed background potentially.
No, you're absolutely right. And to be honest, how I've been brought up as well, about the, I'm not expecting him to also pay throughout the whole dating process. So if he's paid the first or the first 2 times, I will offer to pay as well, in the third. I think that's only fair, especially in the context we're living. Let's say we're both students or just young people just starting to work. So of course there shouldn't be that much weight on the guy to also pay throughout the whole dating process, which might be longer or shorter depending. So for me, that was really just the first date. As you said, absolutely, it's really the guy who's kind of chasing, and so he has that kind of let's say, or people do expect from him that he's gonna act in a more gentleman way. And I also agree a lot with what you said about the macho culture. So I think that's also a negative aspect of dating in Morocco, is that men, not all of them, of course, it depends a lot on education and how they've been brought up, but I think most of them are really more macho and have that feeling that they're a bit, that they have to take care of you, but also that you belong to them. So I've seen that with some of my friends. So even when they're out with other friends of theirs, the couple is always going to stay together, and so the girl is always going to stick to her boyfriend, and because he kind of like has to protect her, but really it's also because she's his in a way, and yeah, he doesn't want her to be flirting or talking with other people. And I think it goes both ways. I think Moroccan women also expect that. So if I'm going out with my boyfriend and or with other friends, of course we don't always have to stay with each other, but I do expect that, that you're going to stay at least next to me or check up on me from time to time, and feel that I'm with you, and not that we're two complete separate people. And I haven't seen that in German couples. Sometimes I've found out at the very end that the two people at a party or whatever were a couple, and I thought, okay, but how? They didn't show any signs of, being in a couple, in a relationship.
Yeah, that's so funny that you say that, because I've had the exact same experience in the Dutch culture, very similar. I would go out with Dutch friends and they were all coupled up, and I didn't know actually who was a couple, because they wouldn't sit together. There wouldn't be any PDA. They wouldn't be lovey-dovey with each other. It was just like two buddies kind of hanging out just with a group, and they come there to hang out with other people, which I think it's, again, it has its pros and cons when we're talking about culture, but it's something very interesting, because I've had a German YouTuber, Feli, Feli, I would say her name wrong, on this podcast. And she had also talked about this, where if German couples go out to a party, because both are so equal and self-sufficient and independent, they go out and they hang out basically with other people at the party. So there's very little jealousy, possessiveness, which in itself is a positive. But if you're looking for that little bit of spice and a little bit of that, like, oh, we belong together, we're part of each other, that romantic feeling in a way, it can seem a little bit dry, I can imagine. And also you're right, like I would love to have my boyfriend check up on me and come up to me and give me a kiss and give me a hug, maybe not from the possessiveness, um you know kind of aspect, but more from the that we're together in this, that we're really really together, and that we really need each other, and that we're here together at this party. So I can see there's pluses and minuses to each one. And it's interesting what you've said about Moroccan men, because we also don't want to paint a rosy picture to say like, oh, Moroccan men are so wonderful and they're so generous. Of course, there's also some negatives as well to dating in Morocco. And it depends, of course, person to person, and city to city, and like level of education, all of that comes into play as well. But that the ego really comes into play as well, which you don't see as much in Germany, I can imagine.
No, not. I mean, I wouldn't say not at all, but not as much for sure. I feel like the ego of Moroccan men has to kind of be fed a bit more. I think all men have that kind of, ego that needs to be fed by women or whoever. But it is a bit more obvious with Moroccan men compared to German men.
Yes, very, very interesting. You had mentioned something to me about language. You speak five languages fluently, and what are those languages?
So it's Arabic, French, those are my mother tongues, and then Spanish, German, and English.
Okay, and you speak English fluently, I can tell. And you mentioned that you speak the other four fluently as well. And have you, I mean, you deal a lot with language. This is in your line of work. Have you thought about how language shapes the way we think, we feel, we express ourselves?
Many times, yes. So languages are associated with culture. So it's very logical that depending on the language that we speak, that we're going to sound one way or another. So not only by the things we are saying, but even our voice. That's also something I've come to realize here with friends that were from other countries. And when I would hear them speak their mother tongue that I don't speak, um, I thought that they had a different voice or at least a different intonation. And I don't know if that's related simply to the linguistic part. I think it's also a bit of the cultural. So I think me being a Moroccan, of course, when I talk, I'm going to use my hands a lot. That's something we do and that I cannot help, that I cannot avoid. But I do think that I use my hands way more when I'm speaking in Arabic than when I'm speaking maybe in German. And so all of that does play a big role. And I think also that I probably also sound a bit more confident speaking in my other languages, so my non-mother tongues, let's say, just because in Arabic and French, I'm more reminded of who I was when I was younger, so when I was still living at home. And I think I grew up a lot since I moved to Germany, but I also grew up in different languages, which is funny also to think about because ever since I've been here, all that growth has been happening mostly in German and also in English, somewhat in Spanish, but not in my own mother tongues. And for me, my mother tongues are really what I speak when I'm back home or when I'm talking with my friends from home or with my parents. And so there's more comfort to those languages. So I'm feeling a bit more bad. I'm going to want to express that in my own language and not maybe in German after a hard long day of speaking only German.
I think it's very interesting how you mentioned the association that a language can bring. So Arabic and French are your mother tongues. So that's those are the languages that you associate with being younger, and those are the comfort languages. Do you also feel that certain languages are more expressive than others? For example, I know Arabic has a lot of expressions for love and for loved ones. And from what I know about German, it's not as expressive as a language. It's a lot more accurate and precise.
That is true. I would say that in Arabic there's a lot of words to call your loved ones. A lot of them are body parts, and that's how, like to say darling or honey. And so that also shows how close the Arabic culture wants their loved ones to be, because they're literally calling them their body parts. As to other languages, it's maybe things that are more valuable. So in German, they use Schatz a lot, which is treasure. So that maybe shows a bit of the culture as well, that they're gonna call a loved one something that has a lot of value, and maybe also like financial value even. Um, Whereas in other countries, it's more with food, you know. In Spanish, I did notice that a lot of words are kind of sometimes could sound insulting, but they're said in such a way and with so much love that, of course, they're not insults. They're just effective words. And I don't know if you will agree with me on this, but for me personally, it's way easier to communicate my feelings in another language other than my mother tongues, or at least not the languages that I speak to my parents with, because I don't know, I'm able to separate myself or from, that kind of like whole emotional part that is blinding me. If I do it in another language, I'm able to detach myself a bit more and kind of think about what I'm feeling, and I'm able to express it a bit better.
I 100% agree with you. I also think English makes it easier to express love because love is thrown about so freely. Americans, for example, they will say the word love to so many things. I just put out a reel recently about that, where it's like they'll overuse the word love. I love these shoes. I love you. I love pizza. I love this show. And so in other languages, or at least in some of the languages, the word love is not used about so freely. So when I say it in Russian as well, and I get your point as well, that it like feels closer to your heart. It means something very different as well. It has a lot more weight to it. And I've talked to people in other countries, and they've shared the same, where, specifically like in Scandinavia, because they say it so rarely and because it's so close to their heart as well, they'll find it easier to say I love you in English than to say I love you in their own language, or in Spanish, for example. But again, it doesn't feel as heavy. It doesn't feel as deep when you say it in another language. It's almost like you can distance yourself a little bit from that word, so it's easier to say. But yeah, saying I love you in Russian, that's a big deal. That's harder. That's definitely harder to say. I agree with you on that. Yeah,
I
it's very
agree as
interesting.
well. Yeah. Mm.
Hmm.
No, it's true. And I also found myself doing that a lot. So even if I'm talking to a Moroccan person, a Moroccan friend, and we're texting, I'm going to text I love you or I miss you almost all the time and very easily, but I wouldn't do that as much in French or in Arabic. And I think also that's maybe also part of the Moroccan culture, is that the parents, um, I mean, they do show their love, but not so much through words, more through actions. Not just parents. I think Moroccans in general. I've mentioned now already food a lot, so I think that's one way of showing that you care for the person, that you love them, that you're taking care of them. But you don't so much express it with words. It's more action oriented, and I think that's also why I personally struggle a lot to say those words, I love you, or even I'm proud of you. So um, they're not just gonna, as you said, in the US, I think they say that a lot, that it kind of lost meaning. And parents are usually proud of their children for anything, for making a drawing. In Morocco, you don't see that as much. And when they say it, it's because it's something big, and then you value it a lot more.
Yes, Americans, they say I love you at the end of conversations, which I find very interesting. Like, love you, bye. And I understand why they
Yeah.
say it, because imagine that's the last time you talk to someone and something happens to them, but you've had a chance to say I love you. However, an overuse of the word love means that, well, it loses its meaning essentially. And that's kind of the not so positive thing about it, in my opinion. As a Russian speaker, we don't say I love you. We know we feel it, but we don't say it because it's a given, I suppose. So it's something like to say to our parents, I love you. I started doing it with my mom because she's getting older. And so it's almost like if anything happens, God forbid, at least I know that I've expressed it enough and I won't have any regrets. And that's why I started doing it. But I don't remember ever doing it before. And she started doing it a lot more as well. So that's something interesting that shifted in the relationship. I've always been very close to her, but we've always just assumed we love each other. We don't need to say it. Um, how has Germany changed you as a person? I love asking this question because for me it's always interesting to find out, I mean, how you come into the country and 7 years later how this country has affected you.
I definitely changed a lot for the positive, I would say. And I think also my family members and close friends have noticed that. I think the main thing is that I've become a lot more confident in general, and also in just voicing things that I like, that I'm interested in, or that I'm good at. So in Morocco, there's a lot of that. I call it fake humility. And it was related to what I told you before. If somebody gets you a gift or pays you a compliment, you have to kind of refuse or say, when people actually pay you compliments in Morocco, you just say, no, you're not that, and they're that, and they're even better. So let's say you even just cooked a meal and it's good because that's the best meal you cook. And the people are going to compliment you. You're going to say, no, of course, it's not any good. And in a way, that's nice because, again, it's the culture. It's you're being modest. But I do think that a lot of times that also caused me to doubt myself more, that imposter syndrome. And I think Germany made me a lot more confident in that sense because people have no problem in voicing these things that they're good at. And it's actually seen as a very good quality to be aware of that and own up to that. So in that sense, I've been working a lot on my confidence, and it's gotten better for sure. Um, and another important thing is also maybe some things that I've had taken for granted in the past. So I think this happens to all of us when we go abroad. Then we start appreciating the things about home, maybe just seeing your parents every day or having a home cooked meal, just simple things of life you start appreciating as if they were treasures, really. And for me, it was that, of course, all of that, but especially having a home country that I can always go back to. Finally, I think I've learned to be more straightforward. So that took a while, and my mom still thinks it's not as polite, but I think it saves you sometimes a lot of time, and you can just be polite and be straightforward at the same time. I've come to realize that it's not an impossible equation.
Wonderful. That was so beautifully said and such a wonderful way to finish the episode. Maha, thank you so, so much for taking part in today's podcast. I've actually learned so much about Morocco, and well, the cultural differences are always really interesting to listen to. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. And if you have any questions for Maha, leave them down below. Maybe you'll come back and check them out, right, and answer them. And of course, if you found anything relevant about this episode, which I'm sure you would have, please let us know what was the thing, the information that you took away or the insight that you really enjoyed. And thank you, Maha. Thanks for taking part. It was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure, as we say back home.
Wonderful, guys. And stay tuned for next week's podcast where we feature another country. Thanks, everyone, for listening, for watching. Don't forget to check this out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And, well, if you're on YouTube, perfect. I'm also going to link Maha's socials below, so you can go say hi, maybe start a conversation, maybe make a friend. Thanks, Maha. Have a wonderful day. Bye.